Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the collaborative album between Open Mike Eagle and Paul White called Hella Personal Film Festival. Well, this is a bit awkward. See, those of you who followed me for the past couple of years know that I covered Open Mike Eagle's dark comedy back in 2014. So much so that it landed on my year-end list of my favorite albums of 2014 at number 3. And really, that record gets better every single time I hear it. A glitchy, frequently funny, often heartbreaking hip-hop album with so much unique wordplay and thought-provoking ideas and concepts. It showed Open Mike Eagle at the very top of his game. And yet, even though I really love that album, I kinda miss both the projects that he dropped in 2015. The first a little bit more excusable. A special episode of it was an EP. I don't normally cover EPs on this channel, and while I did really eventually hear it and thought it was quite solid, it wasn't really something that captured my attention in the same way that dark comedy did. And I've always felt that Open Mike Eagle's thoughts are best expressed on fully formed, fleshed out albums rather than short form. The second project, a little bit less excusable. A collaboration project with Serengeti under the name Kavanaugh, something that just slipped through the cracks at the end of the year with mostly positive reviews, and I kinda forgot to cover it. But you know what? I'm not missing out this time, and even though this is also a collaborative project, it strikes me as a little bit more of a traditional Open Mike Eagle album, as Paul White is a UK-based producer known for working with Danny Brown that handles the majority of the production here. Open Mike Eagle's handling nearly all the rapping, and considering the sound was reportedly more sample-driven and soulful, and yet of course still containing that glitchiness that you would expect from one of his projects that seems to characterize the anxious neuroses, I wondered how well greater focus on melody would complement Open Mike Eagle's occasional sing-song rapping cadence. Either way, blend of old school sounds and progressive lyrical hip-hop, that's right up my alley. So I dug deep into Hella Personal Film Festival. What'd I get? Well, all the more proof that I need to be watching out a lot more carefully for this guy, because Open Mike Eagle easily delivered one of the most thought-provoking, fascinatingly produced, genuinely insightful, and heartbreakingly personal albums that you will hear in hip-hop this year. Like Open Mike Eagle's dark comedy, it's a many-layered exploration of ego and a rapper who's both distinctly comfortable and uncomfortable in the limelight, but Hella Personal Film Festival is a natural outgrowth beyond the jokes to more straightforward insight, and questions that have no clear or easy answers. Oh, and it should go without saying, easily one of the best albums I've heard thus far this year, especially in terms of how well the production and lyrical ideas hold together, form some of the most powerful parallels across this album. It's really incredibly cohesive and really quite special. Now, before we dive in deeply there, we need to start off with Paul White's production. Partially drenched in 70s soul and funk, and for quirky little samples, it's much more organic and smooth than the normal frigid, glitchy elements that normally define Open Mike Eagle's sound. Although, make no mistake, those elements, they do creep in, perpetuating that feel of unease that something isn't quite as right as it might seem. Initially, it was kind of reminded a bit of Ariel Pink and the organic mishmash of samples, borderline chintzy pop culture ephemera, and surprisingly potent grooves, but Paul White's playing things a little bit more composition, a little bit more normal, albeit barely. This is an album about putting forward smiles and happiness against the yawning pit of anxiety within, and as much as he goes to the little details to perpetuate that image that I really love, the liquid funk of admitting the endorphin addiction that expands so well into the bright flourishes of keys and the daytime talk show-esque horn line, it's kinda sleazy and I went outside today. The feigned confidence against the underlying neuroses. It manifests so well in the glitchy normality of Check to Check, the jaunty piano, whistle, and sax on The Curse of Hypervigilance, the choppy soul of Insecurity that later becomes piano accent with a percussion element that sounds like shards of broken glass roiling together on the second part later on the album. And then there are the shifts that are just kinda bizarre, like the shrill blend of harmonica, chipmunk vocals, a sparse beat, and bells on smiling, quirky race dog might be the only time I thought the chipmunk vocal actually kind of worked for me and worked kind of amazingly well. It's one of the best songs here. Or the oddly pompous, vibrating bass and gruff chorus of Protectors of the Heat, or the genuine melancholy of Dive Bar Support Group, the ode to lonely, trashy dive bars with the awkward bass groove and the hook that wouldn't be out of place from any Brooklyn indie pop hipster lamenting over her beer. And it's more the ending of the album ends in a sodden pool of alcohol, first with hints of funk that mirror the album's beginning before dissolving on the closer to a heap of brush cymbals, sci-fi whirring, and a dreary, dirty beat. And all this, it fits together, not just through some phenomenal lyrical transitions and parallels, but the fact that Paul White and Open Mike Eagle played into a knack of real melodic hooks and textures that feel like a fully formed fusion of their styles. Hell, the parts I probably liked the least are when they got a little bit too messy, didn't quite come together, like the hyper-compressed guitar looping on Dang is Invincible, or the warping shrillness of Leave People Alone. And even then, the content, the samples, Open Mike Eagle were all enough to keep things still interesting. And on that note, let's talk about Open Mike Eagle himself, who actually actually puts together one hell of a performance here. I've always had a real fondness for his plain-spoken yet kind of offbeat and melodic rapping style, with interesting rhyme patterns and cadences that manage to remain consistent. But what grabbed me a lot more here was the delivery of that content. This is a record that requires a very difficult emotive balance. From the opening of the album where he's playing towards confidence and excitement that we as the audience are at least partially aware that's a put on, to the moments of anxiety on both insecurity tracks. The form where he wants his girl to give him the truth before then trying to police her tone and then telling her to just outright lie to him. And then later on, when a dinner with a friend gets complicated when a third shows up and he overcompensated for that new friend's arrival. It's intentional social awkwardness, and as such it's a difficult balance to draw out our empathy at these events while still framing the situation that something isn't quite right with how Open Mike Eagle is playing these situations. Similar case for the messy drunkenness of the album's ending, mirroring the confidence of the opening tracks, except this time propped up on alcoholic delusions that eventually have to collapse in upon themselves. And while so much of this plays to similar types of sad sack comedy that Open Mike Eagle has delved into before, this time the framing and the situations are more mundane, more tightly focused, and as such are a lot more relatable to the audience, and yet incredibly tricky to pull off without becoming a caricature. Because make no mistake, when you start looking at the themes and ideas behind this album, caricature is the last thing you want. If only because there's such a richly emotive humanity behind it, even if it is kind of subtle. A black man trying so damn hard to put forward his work and his art as an artist in a world that would seek to snap back on his ego or just crush him passively underfoot. One thing to note immediately is that this is a record that deals in cycles, further emphasizing the smaller scope of the story to just the day-to-day. Almost to the point where you can see the arc of sorts, a day in the life of Open Mike Eagle. He starts off craving the rush of life and endorphins, so he emerges into the world to coast off that natural high of everything going right, and almost immediately you see how it's internally propped up on the little pleasures, to the point where ignoring a Lena Dunham quote would be a source of great relief to him. A line for the record, I absolutely love that, even as a fan of her HBO series Girls. Aesop Rock then follows and delivers a typically impenetrable guest verse that mirrors that same ego with a darker twist, when that ego then hits an apex on Dang is Invincible, where he's almost questioning whether he should feel bad for feeling so good about himself in the modern world. And then yet you see the picture of how fragile that ego really is. Check to Check shows how such self-worth is often inflated by technology, the checks being on social media to his phone. And then the Curse of Hypervigilance shows how so many of those larger social structures to provide security that might give confidence to him are really just all so hollow when examined more closely, leading to a parade of accusations and paranoia that are really so small but are enough to feel threatening to him and really just kind of hilarious to the outside viewer. Of course though, then you have the much larger threat, the much more real threat that materializes on Smiling, Quirky Racestock, where he shows a profound loneliness as he just wishes others could share their happiness with him instead of just turning away because of unconscious racially tinged fear or condescending to then overcompensate to him. And yet in trying to inform them on a track later, he himself is aware of the hypocrisy that comes with telling people to not trust fear-mongering media or to educate themselves when so much of his own message plays to the same visceral impulses that might be triggered by that media, especially when the parallels aren't leading to any real change. You preach to people, they'll just ignore you. And from there, the record turns inwards to one of the most compelling and high-concept songs here, a short about a guy that dies every day, which takes its title character and explores not just the violent deaths that he experiences every day, but also the eternity of the situation, the Groundhog Day of it all, never changing, never any stability to contemplate more time going forward, an explicit parallel to that sense of instability that comes with being a black man in America and knowing the possibility that you could get gunned down any day by the police, and being fed so many conflicting messages surrounding masculinity and stereotypes that would then just perpetuate the cycle. Or to quote Open Mike Eagle directly, eternity is drama, making life the commercial. And then Open Mike Eagle places himself in context with it on Protectors of the Heat, where Hemlock Earth describes a series of elitist gatekeepers of wealth and culture and opulence, social strictures that often prove just as inflexible for them if they wanted to help out. But now as Open Mike Eagle has found success and fought to break out of that world that would confine him out of that wax circle, he sees his voice becomes one with those that would shut the gates on those coming up behind him. It's an insecurity at play throughout the entire album because he just wants to be happy and secure in his life just like anyone else. But where's that security and happiness coming from? A frail ego propped up in the illusion of security? Or the very real security that comes with just giving up, embracing stereotypes, and barricading against those coming up behind him? Or willfully blinding himself and deafening himself to truths that he doesn't want to hear? After all, the burrito you might eat one night to stave off the hangover in the morning, great callback metaphor here, it might not work the next morning. Or even if you do eat it, still kind of tasteless. Just doesn't really fill that void the same way. And there is no easy answer to that question. All he knows is he sinks back into the darkness at the end of the album, his confidence in constant flux, something to which the acceptance of the flip, that loss of control, seems to imply he's at least aware of what he could do to feel better, even if it's not really the right solution. Cycle's just gonna repeat the same next day. The constant search for some form of happiness, some form of security. And while it's never guaranteed for anyone, he knows that, for a black man trying to find success in America, it's even shakier. In short, I don't think it's since Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly that I found such an intelligent, intricate, and downright heartbreaking examination of what it means to be successful as a black guy in America. But the themes of impermanence and insecurity run just as deep and are universal to all of us. That's why I can connect with this album. And while this record does indeed get very serious, it also has some great hooks and fantastic instrumentation, enough subtly brilliant humor that I find more wit to this record every single time I go through it. In other words, you're gonna be hard-pressed to find a more smart, more cohesive, and yet subtly heartfelt hip-hop release this year. For me, easy 9 out of 10, and the highest of my recommendations for this album. Rarely has an MC been able to tap into the big ideas and the little moments of this hella personal film festival so brilliantly. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I got a poll up here. What do you guys think? I'm really genuinely curious because I think this album is absolutely fantastic. It's probably gonna be one of my favorites this year. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.